Okay. After a topic that does tend to highlight the true tedium of legal practice and the high stress areas of it, I thought it would be useful, and traditionally at this time of the year always give a short lecture on a more practical issue, which is the question that the looming fears about mental well-being, stress, depression and anxiety in the legal profession. All of you are probably already well aware of the concerns that are being explored in the legal profession and in the medical profession and in the universities about some of the real challenges that lawyers, particularly lawyers in the group of professions, encounter in their lives. There's some very interesting statistics, very horrifying statistics up here that show a high level of dissatisfaction of work in the legal profession, a high level of alcoholism and substance abuse in the legal profession, and indeed a large number of older, not as old as me, but older practitioners saying that if they had their time again, they probably wouldn't have chosen to go into law and would choose to go into something else. Really quite troubling statistics when you think about your future and the future profession that you're moving into. Of course, on the other hand, they're not troubling in the sense that if you identify with feelings of anxiety, depression, stress or whatever, you can be very sure you are not alone. There's quite a bit of it out there. So you're in a community that may not speak very well about this, but is certainly aware of it. Now, common mental health problems that are encountered, and this is across professions, but where I am talking particularly about law, common mental health problems that are encountered in the legal profession are up here. These are sort of addition to deeper mental health issues that people might have. We're just talking about, if you like, not exactly surface issues, they're very serious issues, but issues that can often manifest, often through law school or through practice or through the first early career in practice or even late in career. And that kind of makes sense because most of these sorts of issues tend to manifest in humans in their late teens, early 20s. So at that stage when you're studying and then moving into your careers, etc., all the existing stresses about that, plus where your brain is at in terms of brain's development and the like, all coalesce and create, I suppose, an area that's fairly ripe for issues to manifest. Now, I would love to be able to say here, well, you can just avoid all that by doing this and that. Well, of course, I can't say that. But what I wanted to talk about is some strategies for identifying and dealing with that, and particularly strategies for the people who are experiencing difficulty. But hey, what about the rest of you? What about your obligation as lawyers to support the legal profession and your colleagues? Because this is just not something that individuals deal with that well. The whole of the law profession has an obligation to look after this. Now, a lot of mental health issues, including depression and anxiety, which are very typical, manifest once or twice. You'll have a terribly bad run, you'll sort it out and get on with it and it won't happen again. But quite often they will become ongoing or fluctuating, and sometimes, and I speak from experience, which I'll discuss again in a minute, but sometimes you can have a pre-existing propensity to anxiety, depression, whatever, that is managed, and then all of a sudden things go wrong and it's not managed very well. So you can find people that go up and down a little bit, and probably all of you have experienced some level of these things. Probably a number of you have experienced quite significant levels. And I guess the message I'm going to be talking about is management. You know, identifying and management is a really powerful thing to do to deal with these. Here are the statistics. They're not very good, are they? We certainly don't do as well on these statistics as the general population. I wonder why that might be. What are some of the reasons you think that law students perhaps report high levels of distress? I know that jurisdictional lectures is probably one of the first ones, but what other reasons do you think? Absolutely. You're looking at this giant competition coming out. You probably have limited ideas of what you've got, what's coming up, as well as a preconception of what it's going to be like. That's pretty scary, isn't it? What else? Yeah, okay, who was that? You're a ventriloquist. High expectations. What do you mean? Absolutely. I mean, most of you will have come from the top level of your schools, wouldn't you? And you're used to being really high performers. Then you all get dumped in here and you're all the same, but you've still got really high expectations. So, and that can be a real driver, can't it? And high expectations can often result in people really putting themselves down. You know, oh God, I'm crap. Oh, I didn't do that perfectly. I'm no good. And that really chews away, doesn't it? What else? What else do you think law students might bring with them into study? Personality type. A lot of studies demonstrate that law students who select into law have what type of personality? A type A personality. All of those things we've been talking about: competitive, driven, perfectionist. All of those things that sound fantastic when you're looking for an employee, but can be pretty exhausting when you're the one actually dealing with perhaps unrealistic or high expectations that aren't quite fitting what's happening. Competition, I mean, as you pointed out, there's competition up there, but that breeds competition in law school, and I know a lot of law students express real disappointment, real sadness and distress at how competitive everyone seems. And there's a lot of studies that show that in a seminar group of law students, but 80% of them are all sitting there feeling like an imposter. I don't know anything. Everyone else in this room is really smart, but I'm really dumb and I don't know anything. And yet everyone's thinking the same thing. So there's kind of this undermining of self-confidence that often happens. And how and why? Well, partly because of that personality type that often underlines people moving into law. Now, the other thing that is interesting, and this is looking at the effect of the profession on wellbeing, the effect of working in the profession, is first of all, we're selected for our pessimism or prudence. And gosh, haven't we started learning that already? We never say to a client, oh, fantastic, this is going to be a winner. Oh, we don't know about this. I can't say at the moment, we're not sure, blah, blah, blah. We're very, very cautious. We look for trouble around every corner, and we usually find it. We also engage in work that often doesn't give us much feedback. You know, it's one thing at an advice clinic that we operate to get a client says, thank you so much, that really helped, and off they go. But when you're involved in big ticket litigation or long litigation, you don't get that feedback. You might get it at the end, but of course by then they might be so annoyed by how long it took and how much it cost that you did a really good job and you don't get the feedback. So we kind of work in an area where that positive feedback is not forthcoming, and that affects wellbeing. Young associates, young lawyers particularly, high pressure, low autonomy, poor conditions, no time, all of those things that together are a recipe for making people really, really miserable. And also the law itself is a zero-sum game. It's a competitive process. Everything you do, whether it's organising contracts or competing in litigation or going through administrative tribunals, although we talk a lot about how we should make the law more collaborative and we should work in a different way to get good outcomes, there's no denying that culturally and traditionally it is still a zero-sum game. So no matter how much we are trying to find our own way and work out ways of doing it, we're kind of in this sort of context. And I guess the reality is that that context isn't going to go away. So it's time for individuals to be empowered or become more resilient to deal with those sorts of issues. Easier said than done, I think, but let's have a look at some opportunities here. I don't think I need to go. I think I probably depressed you all enough already. But it's not uncommon to hear stories about young lawyers going into practice and having to get to work at 7:30 in the morning and not leaving till 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, because that's how long their partner, who is an old middle-aged man with no life, works. And they have to mimic that behaviour. And a lot of students I've known who've got quite what I believe to be quite awesome clerkship type things, they're out within 2 years. They just can't stand it and they just think this is not for me. So we've got this situation where within the workplace there is an enormous amount of pressure that makes it quite an unreal kind of workplace to be working in, and that tends to prevent people having the autonomy to deal with those issues. One of the things that
is common with stress, and I mean stress is a sort of a generalised discussion, but what we're really talking about, I guess, is manifestations of stress in terms of low level to high level depression or high anxiety. It can make you very, as you know what you're like in exams, you can't cope with anything extra, and you know from experience that when you're under stress it all gets just that much harder. It can feed on your mental health issues, it can make you feel more vulnerable, it can make you feel less capable. Usually you get over it. Lawyers often get over it with about like 4 bottles of Burgundy in one night. Not necessarily a good response. Sometimes you need help to get over it, and sometimes if you don't get help, you are not going to get over it. So we really need to think about that situation where people are starting to suffer stress. It's getting worse, they're getting anxious, they're getting a bit antisocial, and all of a sudden, but they're not getting out of it. And that happens really, really commonly. There are different starting points. I think there's a lot of perception, oh, I've just got to work harder and it'll be better. I've just got to work smarter and it'll be better. I'm just not strong enough, or whatever. These are really kind of pointless things to say when you're experiencing this sort of thing. The foundations for mental health issues, particularly stress and anxiety, are not just that you're not good enough. They're not that you can't manage it. They are generally because there's something else going on, some of these sorts of things. And when you've got a bit of vulnerability because of these things coming on, and you've got all that work pressure on top of you, it's actually really hard to get out, isn't it? You just get sandwiched in between where you are and what's on top of you, and it's very difficult to move. And that's what I mean when I said getting help is important, or offering help, because it might not be you, it might be the person in the next office for you, or someone in your firm who needs you to be attuned to what's going on and put a hand out and offer to help. Now, I'll just talk about myself now, because that is so fascinating. I probably present as a fairly normal, well-adjusted person. My grandfather on my mother's side was a benign alcoholic. My grandmother was a crazy hoarder, and I do mean crazy hoarder. I'm just not going to go into this. Both completely batty, should never have bred. But they did! And they produced my aunt, who is one of the last true cat ladies of Victoria, a genuine cat lady with about 100 cats at various times. My uncle, who has had so much electroconvulsive therapy that they will not give him any more. And my mother, who is crazy in a number of respects, but a very, very obsessive, compulsive, list-making organiser. She's very disorganised, but she makes the lists. But that's my family background. It's actually kind of horrifying when you actually stop and think about it. And then when you think of that sort of genetic predisposition, that predisposition, possibly an upbringing predisposition, and all the other stuff that happens in life, it's not surprising that sometimes things go a bit belly up. And I've had instances over the years where I have plummeted into really, really nasty depression over issues with children, over issues with work, relationships. It's not a regular thing, but it'll kind of bubbling along quite well, and then all of a sudden everything seems to go wrong at once, and I just plummet down into a deep, dark hole of misery. So I dealt with that for many years by drinking a lot of wine, and then when I got into my 30s, I thought, actually, there needs to be a better way of dealing with this. So for me, going to the doctor, talking about it, etc., 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 was the way to go. And then I had a terrible car accident and nearly drowned, and I just found after about 2 months, I just had what I call my lava lamp moment. I was just lying in bed, and I had been for about 5 days watching this lava lamp. At which point I thought, oh, there's something really wrong here. So again, sought assistance, sought medical assistance. Since then have been taking enough antidepressants to drop a donkey. But hey, it's working for me. So it's scary to make these admissions. But so my journey was coming from a background that had a predisposition to complete, low-level, those sorts of low-level issues, genetic predisposition, high-pressure work, personal issues, going in and out, and then suffering a quite traumatic event that, without realising it, actually made me really quite ill for a while. And then finding a way out of that, and thereafter managing it. So it's not an uncommon thing for people to experience. It's easy for me at 55 to say, oh, that's what happened in my life. But it's not an uncommon thing, and I think being alert and mindful of what might be happening is really important, and it can affect the way you're operating on a day-to-day basis. Now, self-diagnosis is not an easy thing when you're actually feeling like shit, is it? You just don't have time to sit down, or perhaps these days with tests online you do, but you don't really have time to sit down and analyse what's going wrong because you're feeling so bloody awful that you're not really thinking in that overview way. But look, these are some of the examples of stages of moving into depression. And it's one of those things that probably most people experience sometimes and not for very long. But if you can see yourself moving through those stages, or perhaps more importantly, if you can see someone else appearing to work through those stages, it might be an indication that there's something going wrong. And it might be an indication that you need to stop and take pause and think about where you are and what you can do about it. I think too often people just struggle on. They just think, oh, I've just got to work harder, I've just got to get up earlier, I've just got to do this, I've just got to do that, it'll be all right. Certainly my two daughters, who also have high anxiety, there's a great deal of procrastination and a great deal of, I've just got to work harder. It's like, no, you need to deal with these issues. But it's very easy just to keep on going. And some people go on for years and years and years feeling like this and not coping very well. They're the ones who do have time to work for 17 hours a day in their offices because they've got nothing else to do. And what often happens, and it's a bit of a spiral, isn't it? It's a bit of a downward spiral. You start getting a bit stressed. This is what I find happens to me. I get a bit stressed. My confidence, which is usually fine, gets a bit shattered. I start to doubt my competence. I get paranoid, and I think people are talking about, not like crazy paranoid, but I get paranoid, and I actually think people are sort of laughing about me, or my colleagues might be saying, oh, she's a bit crap, she's not working very hard, which is rubbish. And then you feel bad, and then you work longer hours, but you don't actually achieve very much more, and then you get more tired and more stressed, and then you make more mistakes and feel more terrible and lacking in confidence, and this can just keep on going, can't it? It can just keep on going, and it just feeds into itself. And it's very hard, I speak from experience, when you're in that process to actually see what's happening and do something about it. Now, the reason this is really important in the legal profession is that at least 1 in 3 disciplinary proceedings against lawyers or negligence actions involve lawyers who have depression or mental health as a causative factor. This absolute classic downward spiral has resulted in them not managing to keep up with their work, letting time limits get out of time, fumbling their trust account, basically losing competence because they're spiralling down. They're not reaching out for any help. They're not saying to a partner or a colleague, Jesus, I'm in trouble, I need some help here because I'm going to, blow my practising certificate. And quite often, the people around them aren't seeing it either. They're just thinking, oh, yeah, he's really hard working. Yeah, we work hard in this profession. We're really working hard. And he seems a bit grumpy, but that's because he's got a big trial, whatever. And so within the profession, this sort of process can be happening and no one's picking it up. The person who's suffering it is not picking it up, and the people around them. And that might be people on the other side of the practice. It might be another lawyer who's acting against the person, thinking, Jesus, this is not going well. What is wrong with this person? Is there something going on there? So being attuned to these is a really important first step. This is a typical lawyer's working day. It's very long, it's very tedious, it's very high pressure, there's seldom a moment to take a breath. You are really full on from start to finish. Look, it looks exciting probably from you. You think, yes, I'm waiting to get out there. But when you think about a whole day that's crammed full, that makes it very difficult to take a breath and just get yourself on track. And that's what we tend to do. We tend to work from dawn till dusk. And not take a moment out. And so, of course, if you can imagine trying to go through all of those tasks back to back, bang, 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 with 5 takeaway coffees in the meantime, really, if you think about it, you're not very efficient. You're not very reliable. I mean, you're doing the job, but your efficiency and your brain capacity is kind of challenged because of that amount of busyness. Now, one of the things that you can do in a typical lawyer's working day, or indeed in a typical student's working day, which is probably not quite so busy, but stressful enough, is actually look at that and think, okay, where do I take time out? Where do I break? How can I possibly imagine that I can work from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, continuously,
without doing anything, without having a break, and be efficient. It's a bit like saying, I could lift weights for 18 hours. Well, that's not going to work, is it? You just can't use a resource, whether it be your brain or other muscles, continuously. So one thing you need to think about, and this is something you can be responsible for, is proper resting and proper breaks. Is one of the things I'm going to be ranting on about incessantly about the exam. It is not our intention that you spend 6 hours sitting there. That's not how we want lawyers to work, and that doesn't produce good work. 40 minutes, 10-minute break, another 40 minutes, go and have a coffee or go for a walk, come back. That's really, and if you think about a busy working day, you can do that. That's something you can manage, is to give yourself moments out of it. The other thing is that people often feel a really big sense of responsibility, and I know from my CLE students who've started out on placements, initially a lot of the feedback we're getting in our classes is, I feel really responsible for these people. I can't save them. I can't save the world. I can't make everything work out, but I feel enormously responsible. Or they feel that they're never satisfied. How many of you never feel satisfied with the work you've done and just go back and do a bit more and just do a bit more? You can always do more work. You can always worry about everyone else in your professional sphere. But it is important to, at least at this stage in your careers, think about the possibility that there's a line to be drawn, and that within a realistic work day, for a reasonably intelligent, well-prepared person who's making a decent effort, there's a point at which you just have to stop and do the best you can and move on. And that feeds back to what we were talking about, that sense of that high achieving, high expectations. High expectations being, I have to be perfect. You can't. And in litigation and in legal work, you can be thorough and diligent and effective. If you think particularly about litigation, being perfect means you would win every case, and let me tell you, that is just not going to happen. So the logic of being perfect and always being able to be just a bit better isn't there. So as you develop in a career like this, you need to think about where you draw the lines and what's satisfactory, what's sufficient, and where worry becomes pointless. Confidence, anxiety, overwork and exhaustion, they can be really, really taxing. And particularly for young lawyers who are starting out in a new environment. Culture isn't responsive to this. In our legal culture, we're still really prickly about depression. I don't imagine that many of you, getting your first clerkship or work experience, would rock up to the senior part and say, by the way, I've had a few bouts of depression and I get really anxious when I'm under stress in this situation. It wouldn't probably be a bad thing to say, because the person would say, oh God, I know what you mean. I'm exactly the same. This is how I deal with it. But it's just not the sort of thing you want to raise. A, because it's competitive. A, because you think all the people around you are trying to vie for your job and cut your throat and get in the way. And B, because it doesn't feel like a good thing to do, does it? It's just not something you might be comfortable doing it. People don't want to talk about it. A lot of people in the legal profession don't talk about it. More and more do. More and more people go to the Law Society's free mental health advice service, where you can get free meetings with a psychologist to work through these issues. More and more students, in my experience, go down to student services and deal with this proactively. So more and more people are acknowledging and dealing proactively with these issues. It's still pretty scary to be out there and talk about them, particularly when you're starting a career. So I think one of the, and I suppose then that whole culture of zero-sum bargaining that underlies our legal system, weakness is seen as a bit antithetical to the whole lawyer's role. So it's talking about this sort of this difficult connection between the reality of a lot of people having issues, having problems and stresses, and a lack of comfort in talking about it. It is improving. The law profession in the USA, the UK and Australia are really looking at dealing with these issues. The full kit, that's a fantastic resource if you want to note that down. It links up to law care. It talks in an ordinary way about mental health issues in a way that, you know, I think normalisation is really important. I mean, a lot of people, if you look at the stats, experience it. Doesn't mean you have to go out and yap about it all the time, but the more people do acknowledge and talk about it, the better it is, and acknowledging the issues. And I think that those sorts of resources, in fact, provide enormous support for people who are experiencing difficulties in this area. The other side of that, of course, is that you will have read, if you read, you know, some of those lawyers' magazines, a lot of big law firms talk a lot about what they're doing.
They're providing, I don't know, masseurs for their staff who work 20 hours a day, and they're providing in-house dinners so that you never, ever, ever have to go home. And they're providing corporate couple gyms so that you never have to go outdoors to get exercise. So it looks good, a lot of this stuff, and it's probably well-meaning, but it might be worth thinking about some other ways to deal with those issues. And that's the opportunity. So rather than going into that sort of detail at the moment, there are quite a lot of studies that are demonstrating things like getting out of the office isn't such a bad... You know, smokers, I used to be a very keen smoker, and when they banned smoking in Commonwealth buildings, I spent, of course, half my day outside smoking 3 cigarettes at once. But they did some studies in the public sector about that whole issue, and they found that smokers were much more efficient at work than non-smokers. And they put that down to the fact that they got out of the office every couple of hours for 10 minutes, and then they came back in. Whereas everyone else was just sitting there getting staler and staler and staler. So there's a lot of techniques you can look at to relieve the indefinicy of a 10-hour day. And at the end of this, I'm going to give you some resources to have a look at. Just things like those little frisbee things we had last week. Just chuck a ball around, do a tennis ball, stare at the wall, go down to the photocopier, not really staring away from your screen and just looking at something else. Go down to the photocopier and get it. Well, no one uses that anymore, do they? But take opportunities to break that day up can be enormously powerful for low-level stuff. High-level stuff, you've got to deal with it in a bit more detail. So I want you just to think about these questions as the first step in this. I want you to ask yourself, and you don't have to tell anyone else because this is private and personal, just you for a minute, think about what would your answer to those questions be. And I guess if you haven't thought about those questions before, now might be a good time to think about them so that you had a plan, a strategy if things started to go a bit wrong. My response is generally just to take more drugs, legitimate drugs. But I suspect, and I do some yoga and I live on a farm and do walking, but I suspect just taking more drugs isn't the only answer. Oh. So that's something to think about. What would you do if you found yourself in that situation? And have any of you actually ever, I don't want you to answer this, but have any of you actually felt like this? It's a horrible feeling, isn't it? You just feel awful. And it's almost like you know what's happening. I mean, certainly, you know, the people I know who are almost all depressed, the people I know, you can articulate it, but somehow or other you can't get out of it. So knowing that if you felt like that and you know how hard it is to do anything about it, how does that inform you about what you might do if someone else was in that situation? Because hopefully if you're in that situation, you'll have a glimmer of capacity. You'll have thought about those 3 questions. Think about it. But what if you can't? Who's going to help you and how are they going to help you? So I want to ask these questions. What if you thought, what would trigger you to think that someone around you was suffering depression or mental health issues? What changes would you expect to see? Yes. Right at the back?
More irritable and lack of energy.
Yep, lack of energy, tired, not doing stuff. Someone down here? Withdrawing. How withdrawing?
So even not making as much.
Yes. I'm too busy, I can't go out, I've got this work to do, I'm really tired, I've got work tomorrow. So that withdrawing with or without excuse, just disappearing or withdrawing with excuses, that's a really good one. What else? Yes. Yeah. And I suppose a lot of the time it's very easy when someone's doing negative self-talk, we tend to want to empathise. So there's a lot of, oh, I know how you feel, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes what's needed, in fact, is something different from that, isn't it? What do you do? I mean, I'm trying to pin you down. What do you do if a friend's negative self-talking?
I try and let them sit on the
Good. Yeah.
take them out of their little vibe, but then maybe do some evaluation, do a good job, hearing,
Yeah.
speech, full-on leap
only counselling, isn't it? But it's also recognising how that person might be feeling with all those steps going downwards and actually chipping away and sending them back up again. What else do you think might be an indicator of someone feeling stressed, depressed, miserable? Yes. Sometimes also a bit obsessive, a lot of talk about particular issues, and you think, oh my God, they just can't process this. They're just going round and round and round in it, and it's hard to know what to do. Walking away is often very tempting because it gets boring, but it's probably not the right thing to do. What else? Anything else? Increased drinking, yes. I suppose, I don't know, on the student level, perhaps that's hard to gauge. But definitely, I don't know what it's like now. It was a long time ago when I went to uni. But yeah, definitely increased drinking, or perhaps drug use is quite possible too. What else?
Sometimes people who like change in personality, and sometimes it's harder with friends, but certainly with family, like when you're brothers and sisters, they just like being real dickheads.
Yes.
Like, and it's not because they're upset at you or whatever that they've got, like just compensating badly
Yes.
for their own issues.
Yeah, they're not coping with anything, and they're not coping with relationships either, and so that lack of coping comes together, and you do find increased anger, seemingly thoughtlessness and things like that are quite common. Any others? Yeah, that's true, isn't it? You just can't get anything to work and everything's too hard, and you just feel, this is my life actually, and you just come into your office and want to burst into tears because you haven't sorted anything out. That's a really important one. What else? Any more over here? Yes. Yeah, and those are all a good selection of not uncommon behaviours that people have that are a really good indicator. So what would you do? What do you reckon you'd do? I hope no one's going to say, I'll snap out of it. That's really bad. What do you think you could do if you encountered a colleague, friend, peer, who was exhibiting these sorts of things? Yeah, so you'd have to raise it though, wouldn't you? And how would you do that? Yeah, just start a conversation with someone and let that go. That's a really good, gentle way to do it. What else? Let's go for a walk. Yeah, well, not in my case. Let's go for no running. Let's go for a walk, or let's go to the movies, or let's do something. Yeah, get them to come out and do something. What else? There was another one up here. Yes.
Yeah, like try and get them away from thinking that they have to work like 24/7 and think, okay, like you've had a really long day. Why don't you just go home and have an early night and start in the morning?
Yeah, there is that thing. I mean, certainly my experience has been, I can work till midnight or 1 o'clock. And if I just went to bed at 11 and got up an hour earlier, I'd get everything done in the first hour anyway. And yet you think, oh no, I've got to keep going. So yeah, actually influence people to move them on. And you can do that with some of the talk and some of the discussion around those issues. What else? Yes?
Maybe in a workplace, saying, take a mental health day.
Yeah. Take a day off, or let's make some breaks together. Let's, you might say, well, let's both go out of the office every hour and a half for 10 minutes, or take a day off, or whatever. And encourage someone to be, if they're feeling that they've got the axe over their head because they're no good, then you have to work maybe quite hard to get them to do that. Yes?
And I think the other thing, especially now, so even is to talk to someone, and that professional help isn't, like, that's why they're professionals.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So I want to talk to someone who actually knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And that it's not a taboo, like it's not a big deal to go and talk to someone who knows lots about mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really encouraging to see more and more senior lawyers, judges and the like actually coming out and publicly talking about their own experiences. And that sort of leadership from high up in the profession is really important. But it's leadership that you can all provide as well. And it's an extraordinary and very sad thing when you think how many people have this experience but they have never mentioned it to anyone. And yet if I went up to someone and said, they'd probably say, oh, I know, I actually do know how you feel, I've been there. And that support would be so valuable, but we don't seem to do that. So that's something that, but you don't have to go up and say, I understand how you feel, you probably don't. But
clearly your capacity, and you are all capable of identifying and supporting people in that situation. A lot of studies have been done about what's most useful for people experiencing mental health challenges in employment, and the most useful thing, overwhelmingly the most useful thing, is talking to colleagues. It's starting to talk to someone else about it at that really low level that then enables people to start moving forward and doing things about it. So the good colleague, which all of you have spoken will be, the good colleague is often the first step in dealing with this. And often it is, as you say, you saying, well, why don't you come out for a run? Why don't we go down, don't go down and have a drink? Why don't we go out and have something to eat? Why don't we sit down and talk about these cases? Have you got anything interesting happening? Anything I can help with? There's a whole lot of ways that you can reach out to other people. And if you are able to do that, then you make a tiny difference, but a significant difference in how this process works. It actually takes a lot of courage, because sometimes people just push you away. They don't want to do it, they feel threatened, they don't want to acknowledge it themselves, and they want to live in a bubble of denial. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't keep trying. I think a lot of the time when people are experiencing stress, and certainly my experience as a lecturer with a lot of students who exhibit stress, is that often a bit of ongoing support and interest is necessary. There's this sort of "Are you okay?" day thing. It's quite extraordinarily effective. Just someone saying, "Are you okay? How are you going?" and actually stopping and listening is really powerful too. So there can often be an ongoing support role without taking on a counselling role, but just a little bit of ongoing support can be really valuable. And probably, I hope you're all sitting there now thinking about experiences you've having with friends, thinking, I can see where that was happening with them, and maybe I could do this if that happens again. I can just take some steps. Obviously, some fairly obvious, some obvious things here. Snap out of it, put a smile on your face. Doesn't work at all, you're likely to get a punch in the nose. Being available is really important. Letting someone know you actually care enough and you are available. Most people, when they're feeling depressed or anxious, actually feel guilty about wasting people's time. I don't want to trouble you. I don't want to waste your time talking about me. I feel so inferior about what I'm going through that I don't want to waste your time. So if you let people know that it's okay and you acknowledge that they need a bit of support, and that's fine, that makes quite a big difference. And don't ever say, I know exactly how you feel, because you actually never do know exactly how someone else feels. I wanted to raise this because obviously personal wellbeing is really, really important, but the profession needs people to be healthy. We do not need people stuffing up cases, giving clients bad service, making the, overworking or underworking, missing dates, being terrible litigators because they're under too much stress and they're stuffing everyone around. We do not need that. So it's kind of a professional imperative as well as a personal one. And as a profession, when you are admitted, you will go to the Supreme Court, and one or the other of the Supreme Court judges will tell you about how the profession is there to support you, and you are entitled to demand support from the profession. That's what we are. That's why we're a profession. But as part of that, you can start doing that from the moment you start. You don't have to wait till you're a senior partner to be taking those roles. And often indeed, as younger starters who are more demanding about what you'll put up with in employment and more attuned to these issues, more au fait with them, you are the ones who might be influential in bringing those conversations about and engaging with people who need support. I've just listed some resources there. Look, these are all incredibly simple suggestions and opportunities and statements. Incredible simple places to look at. They're good if you're not feeling so good yourself, and they're really good to help other people. The only thing I would warn against is those online quizzes. Are you bipolar? Are you schizophrenic? Do you have whatever personality disorder? Because I have all of them whenever I do those things. And if I come in a bit under, I think, oh, maybe I didn't do that right. Maybe I really do have such and such. So be a bit wary of those. But certainly thinking about your own health and being a bit analytical about where you are can make a huge difference. I mean, look, really, you've paid a lot of money to do this law degree. You're excited about your futures. You've got lots of options. You don't want to have shit futures. You want to actually have lives that are good. And although lives in legal practice and in law work will be really challenging and demanding, there's a lot you can do to manage it and make it less and make it not shit, because it doesn't have to be. And a lot of these resources are just good ways of talking about that. Now, I know when you go out there you have limited autonomy, but there is stuff that you can do to try and help yourself through it and help others through it. So that I guess if this is where you're going with your career, you really thrive. You know, it'll be tough and there'll be difficult times, but the capacity to be resilient and thrive will make all the difference. And I think a lot of the time, I think what we don't do in law school is say to our students, look, there are ways for you to be resilient and think about this and look after yourself, and it will make life better in the long term. Self-help resources. Adelaide University has, look, study tips. Who doesn't need those? They have some fantastic study tips coming up to exam time, not a bad idea. They have very good wellbeing tips. They have all of this stuff, which is in fact, and I actually look at them myself. I look at time management every day. It doesn't have worked yet. But really, the perfect procrastinator, I fall in that one too. So really, those are really useful things. And I just often think, you know, the more you remind yourself of that, the more it goes in. And the more you start picking up little bits and pieces of way to deal with it. So I thoroughly recommend them. They're really good. And also the student counselling service is fantastic as you finish this year of horrendous stress and evidence and DO and everything. You need a bit of help, go down there. They're really, really awesome. So other stuff here. Oh, knitting. What they say you need to do is you need to have a life. And even people in, you know, people who are talking about stress, and students talking about how they've managed their future, how lawyers talking about how they manage their career. Everyone says have other interests, have hobbies, do something else, make time for it. So with that in mind, I mentioned the whole knitting thing, but and we did some scrapbooking with Anne's card. So think of things that you can do that give you a creative outlet, because often that will make a difference. Okay. My aunt no longer keeps cats, I should say. She's grown old and cannot manage them, but in her heyday it was quite a cause célèbre. Thank you. Oh, can I have the card, please?